Welcome to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers with Linda Prio. Will it be possible to remain in my home as I age? Do I feel safe in my home? How do I figure out how much support I will need when my health needs start to change? What if I decide to move into a community instead? Which community will meet my needs now and in the future? Who will play a role in helping me with decision making? Do you ask yourself these same questions? Aging in Place Strategies and Answers can help you gain practical knowledge that will help you create your own Aging in Place roadmap. If you are already a care partner, a power of attorney, or in crisis mode with your Aging in Place strategy, you will learn what you need to know that you don't know. For over 20 years, I have been marketing Aging in Place services to clients and educating families and healthcare professionals in how to put aging in place strategies into place. When you utilize aging in place, you are allowed to choose where you want to live and make those decisions so that you can retain your quality of life. Thank you for joining me today. This podcast is titled My Last Request, Conversation Starters. So from the title, you can tell we're going to be talking about a difficult subject, a topic that most of us want to avoid talking about, and yet it is a topic that will impact each one of us. You've probably heard me mention this before, but we created our trust documents and our health directives several years ago. And on the anniversary date, when we created those documents, we get them out and we review them. We look over the documents to see what is no longer applicable. Did we sell something? Did we buy something? Are all of our accounts that we still have still in the trust? Are there things that we need to change, people we need to add? And then we also have other sections that are in these documents that we need to think through. And so last year, when we got to the section on our last requests, I'm going to be honest, we were able to discuss some things, but we weren't able to answer all the questions. And so we've been thinking about going back to those decisions that we need to make now in 2024 when we get those documents out again to review them. You and I are not unique in our desire to not talk about our last request. The Institute for Healthcare Improvement has an initiative called the Conversation Project. It is a guide that you can download, and will help you talk about what matters to you and decide what kind of say you want in your healthcare. The Conversation Project wants to help everyone talk about their wishes for care through the end of their lives so that their wishes are understood and respected. I might suggest it is just those kinds of questions that we want to avoid, but in my years of working in healthcare and seeing families in crisis, it has really helped me to push forward and complete the necessary process required for end-of-life decision-making. Legal documents, healthcare directives, last wishes regarding healthcare decisions, and even disposition of the body, which can and should include funeral planning. See, I told you it was going to be a difficult topic, but you're going to hang in there with me, and we are all going to learn a lot. As we begin 2024, I'm going to challenge my listeners in this area to begin this process. I am confident that once you have completed the process, you will feel an immense sense of relief. And when the time comes, you will then bless your family because they don't have to make those final decisions. Why put your family through the unnecessary decision making when there will be so many other decisions that they're going to need to make at the time of your passing and at a time when they are experiencing so many other emotions? The COVID-19 pandemic has really brought advanced planning back to the forefront of conversations. It was a time when we saw valued family members, co-workers, and friends become ill with COVID and then pass unexpectedly. Have these conversations about your last wishes before you need them. Let's take a moment to hear from one of our sponsors. Hi, listeners. This is Linda Prio, your host and one of the sponsors of Aging in Place Strategies and Answers. If you would like to have a speaker for your group or your organization, please contact me at linda.agingstrategies@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Before we look a little bit more intently at conversation starters in relationship to end-of-life planning, I think it's a good time to stop and think who you might name as your healthcare advocate, because there might come a time when you might not be able to share your desires or your requests due to a health situation, and then who would be able to help with that decision making on your behalf. And so having a healthcare advocate or a healthcare proxy would be that person who could then step in and make those decisions or say, this is what Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith or what my aunt or my uncle or my father or my mother told me that they wanted. In fact, it's right here in their healthcare directives. So a healthcare proxy is someone who would be in charge of making medical decisions for a person should they become unable to make those decisions independently. Not only does having a healthcare proxy give peace of mind to the dying person, knowing that their decisions will be made by the person that they trust, but having everything all in writing also protects the proxy against arguments from other family members. I like a TV drama just like everyone else, but what no one likes is family drama. So think through who might be your advocate or your healthcare proxy. I also want you to be thinking about if you are the only one named for an aging relative as their healthcare proxy. And the reason why I'm asking you to think this through is because this happened to me. Many of you have heard me share before that I was my mother's healthcare advocate. And one day on the way to work, I was almost in a car accident, and it shook me up, and it kind of made me think about if something would have happened to me at that moment, who would have been able to advocate for my mother? I was the only one on those documents. So if this could be you, I'm going to ask you to ponder whether or not you should add somebody to that document. So what I did in my situation is that I made sure there were 2 additional names added to my mother's healthcare directives and power of attorney. That way, if something should happen to me, then somebody could be directed to act on her behalf. So important information. As you work through the Conversation Project, and you can download this document. You can find it easily on the internet. They're going to be asking you some specific questions on, how much knowledge do you want about your condition, medical decisions that you might need to be making. They will also ask you about treatment and diagnosis, as well as your last request. So let's go back to the beginning. And this particular question is about how much knowledge you really want about your condition. Everybody's different, and this is why you may find yourself falling somewhere in the middle and not at either end of the extreme. So just know that this is a question that you're going to ask yourself, and then you're going to write your answer to. So are you the kind of person who just prefers to know the basics about your condition and the treatment, or do you want your medical team to go into a lot of detail and telling you a lot of information? The next question they ask is about medical decisions. Will you leave medical decisions up to your healthcare team so that they can do what they think best? Or do you want to have input on every healthcare decision that is made? I know how I would want to answer that question, but how do you want to answer it? We are all individuals. We all think differently, but somewhere between those two extremes, you might have an answer. When it comes to medical treatment, will you get the care you need? And would you like the treatments not to impact the quality of your life? Or do you want as much care as possible? In other words, do everything they can to extend your life. And I also just want to add here that we may have very different feelings as we go through our life. So if you're putting this together and you want to review it, you've got that opportunity. These are just conversation starters, and you can change your mind. You can even change your mind as you're going through a diagnosis or a healthcare decision-making progress. So just because we have it in black and white doesn't mean that our thoughts or feelings won't change. But the reality is it's kind of nice to know where you are, so that when you're with somebody who's going through a situation, or you yourself are going through this, then you'll know exactly what you're thinking at the time. So diagnosis, I thought this was interesting. Here were the questions that they asked. I do not want to know how quickly my condition is progressing and how many days I have left, or I want to know exactly how my condition is progressing and what my life expectancy is. Other people are very concerned about their healthcare information, and some would like to keep that information very private, and some don't mind if it's shared with family members or with others. So you get to make those choices. You also get to make some choices in your thinking and what you would desire, where you would like to receive care. Do you see yourself living in a healthcare facility, or would you prefer to spend your last days at home? And then, of course, it's the last request. Would you want your wishes followed as you've outlined them, or do you trust the people that you chose as your healthcare proxy or your healthcare advocate to do what is right, even if it might not be your choice? And so you can see that the questions are really from one end of the spectrum to the other, and maybe, again, your answer lies somewhere in between, or closer to one end or closer to the other. When you pass or when you die, would you prefer to be alone, or do you want to be with people? The Conversation Project Starter Guide is a start. So you may have other questions or thoughts that came to your mind while you were working through the outline. And so you can feel free to add them, because now that your juices are flowing about your last requests, then why not continue to write them down? That way it will be more complete. And then again, you're going to get the chance to review it because nothing is set in stone. So feel free to have that option to just go ahead and continue adding ideas and thoughts that are coming to you now that you're finally sitting and thinking about your last request. So we've talked about choosing an advocate just in case you might not be able to advocate for yourself. We've thought through some basic questions that we need to be aware of and thinking through in regards to our last requests or our medical decision making and how we want that to look if we were faced with a life-threatening illness or diagnosis. But now we want to open up a conversation with those people that we have chosen that will advocate on our behalf. And for those people that we really want to know what we're thinking at the end of our lives. So how would you start that conversation? Sometimes it can just happen very naturally. And then sometimes you just really have to think through how you might begin a conversation like that. Because sometimes when we say to somebody, I'd like to start a conversation about my last request, people will say, no, I don't want to talk about that now. This is not the time for that. And it's really just because sometimes we just don't want to be faced with that reality. And so that can end a conversation right there. So I think the more natural we can make this conversation, the better off we might be. So again, the Conversation Project has a list of ways that you can use to begin a conversation. You might reach out to your healthcare proxy or your healthcare advocate and say, I heard about a conversation project and I downloaded a copy of it, and I have been thinking through my answers to some of those questions. And the questions have really guided me in my thinking about what will matter to me at the end of my life. And I'd like to spend some time sharing that with you. Do you think you can find about 30 minutes that you can sit with me and just talk this through? That may be a great way to start the conversation. Or maybe you could say something like this. I have been doing some advanced planning with my attorney and was wondering if you would be able to make my healthcare decisions if and when I could not. That might help you to start a conversation to find that perfect person who could advocate for you if you were unable to. And then once you have the person identified, then a natural conversation could result that would then continue the conversation, such as this. I completed my legal documents the other day with my lawyer, and now you are named as my healthcare advocate, proxy, or decision maker if I cannot advocate on my behalf. I would love to give you an overview of that information in the documents. So could we set aside maybe 20 to 30 minutes to have a conversation? And don't worry, you don't have to write down anything because everything is written down already and it's in my documents. But I would like to know and go over what it says. Having things written down and having these conversations started is just a way to give you more peace of mind and less worries. And so I have been really fortunate to meet so many people in my career. And so I want to share a quick story with you. And this is why it just helps if you're just willing to take that time and get things down in black and white. One client told me that her father had always managed the finances. He managed the insurance, the investments. He knew everything about every bill that needed to be paid. He knew where the titles were. He knew the accounts. He knew what banks they were at. And what he did is that he organized everything in a neat file because he realized, since he had managed all that information, that if he wasn't there, someone else would have a hard time putting all those pieces together. So she said, we have been really blessed in our family because my dad was organized and he had it all together for us, because my mom has not touched any of this. However, I usually hear many more stories of widows and widowers whose loved ones took care of all that, and now that they are alone, they are on a steep learning curve, because now they have to piece it all together. They have to wait for statements to come in to figure out where things are. And you and I both know that a lot of things aren't even sent in the mail anymore. So if you can be organized and if you can do this, it's going to be a big benefit to those who are coming after you and trying to follow your pattern. So this is another great reason that you should review your documents each year. I would also like to suggest that any passwords for phone, laptop, iPad, and other accounts that you own are also written down, usernames and passwords, please. And then also include your usernames and passwords for any emails or social media accounts that you have. And remember that conversations can flow both ways. So if your loved one is reluctant to start a conversation or begin a conversation to discuss what their last wishes, their final requests are, then maybe you're the one who needs to start the conversation. Take comfort in knowing that even if you're the one to initiate the conversation, the dying person has probably already been thinking about the subjects on your mind. Most people at the end of their lives are acutely aware that their time on earth is coming to a close. All you're doing is opening a door to the conversation, which they might find as a relief. You might start the conversation like this. I know this can be a difficult conversation, but I want to talk to you so that I can be sure that your wishes are being respected. Have you chosen a healthcare proxy, and do you have written instructions so that we can follow them when you're unable to speak for yourself? By asking this simple question, you will learn where they are in the process and if the documents have even been started or created. If you find out that the wishes are in black and white, then plan a date and a time to go through them and find out where they are kept. But if you have found out that they have not started that process, then why don't you go to the internet and download the document that has been put together, and it's called Your Conversation Starter Guide. You might also think through when a good time and place would be to have this conversation, but don't let distance prevent you from having that conversation. We have FaceTime, we have meeting apps, we have lots of opportunities. So even if you're long distance, go ahead and arrange a time to have this discussion. You might even follow up this discussion with a statement like, I'm really proud of you for taking the time to think through this part of your life and making it easier for all of us. Now, all of us have peace of mind. Now, here's one more question for you. Have you thought through what kind of funeral or your choices are for disposition of the body? And if so, where is that information? And where can I find it if I should need it? And again, if they have not thought through that, well, then now might be a good time. I want you to stay tuned for next week's interview with Dan Flynn, Managing Funeral Director for the Neptune Society. You're going to learn what home funerals are, how pre-planning is a benefit, but how to say no to unnecessary funeral charges. You are not going to want to miss that interview because Dan knows just how to make such a difficult topic entertaining. When you have a meaningful end-of-life conversation with a loved one, you honor them by respecting their wishes, and you give yourself some peace of mind during a difficult time. So don't be afraid to start the conversation. Your loved one will be glad you did. Now, you know, at the end of every podcast, I offer a caregiver tip, and here is my tip for today. Sometimes, caregiver, you are absolutely the best one to start a conversation with your loved one about their final requests, their last wishes. It could happen while you're bringing in the groceries or dropping off the prescriptions or even sitting over coffee. You can even use my podcast as a way to begin. Hey, Dad, I heard this great podcast about getting the conversation started about the end-of-life decision-making. It made me really think through what I want, and I was just wondering where you are in this process. Have you already gotten started on that, or is that already done? And if the answer clearly shows that neither one of you have started, then you can end with this. How about I get us a copy of the Conversation Starter Guide and we can work through it together? Thank you for joining me today. Please remember that this podcast is intended as guidance and not advice. Share this podcast with friends and family who are currently in crisis mode or with people who would like to start developing their own roadmap for aging in place. Listeners, if you would like a deeper dive into a topic discussed during a podcast, please subscribe to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers, where you will be able to access premium content. Or if you would like to suggest a topic for this podcast, please contact me at linda.agingstrategies@gmail.com. As always, I value the time you spend with me.